Again, still alive, even after 1 hour, we're still here. Our petrol tank of morality hasn't run out yet. How amazing. So we're not going to waste this precious life. We're going to listen to these teachings and see if we can understand Samsara and Nirvana and see what tools we can take from it so we can develop our amazing potential, unbelievable, discover the nature of our mind, then be of benefit to others. That's why we're here together. Before we go further, I wonder if there's any questions in the little chat box there or anything people have asked. Nothing in the chat, no. Are there any questions left over?
There was actually a question, Venerable, from a little bit earlier on from Jessica.
Yes, good.
The question was, how do we practice greeting suffering we cannot change?
That's the point. If you can change it, it wouldn't matter, would it? That's what patience is. And it's actually an advanced practice. This is the whole point. That's what we've got to understand. This is why we have to understand. This is why we have to understand. This is why we have to understand the levels of teachings. We just don't hear it that way, you know. The first level is you control your body and speech. At least you don't shout and kick and scream or get depressed or try to kill yourself or stuff yourself or go to sleep and avoid. That's controlling your body and speech. This is the first level of practice, already profound. So if you've got a person who's being mean to you in the bus and you can't do anything about it, at least you refrain from harming back. At least you keep your mouth shut. At least you don't punch them in the nose. That's controlling your body and speech. Then, as the Buddha says, if you can change something, please, honey, change it. Right there, change it. But we can see the vast majority of most of our suffering that we get, we can't change. And that's why we all go mad. We bash our heads against brick walls, feeling how outrageous this happened, how dare this happen, it's not fair that it happened, it's not my fault, this is terrible. And we beat and shout and yell and scream, trying to change it. And we just increase our suffering. We increase our suffering. This is the tragedy. This is the tragedy. So, you know, one step at a time, one step at a time, see what the problem is. And then the first step is also the next part of this first part of the process before you start practicing patience, you understand karma. Karma means whatever's in front of you, you created it. This is so profound, but I mean, most of us don't even get to that point. We still almost can't believe that it's possible that whatever happens to us is a result of our own actions. It's too painful for us. We hear it as punishment. We hear it as vindictive. We hear it as punitive. It's hard for us. But this is 90% of the problem will be solved if we understand that what arises in front of us, the good and the bad, is the fruit of our actions. At least we can own them. That already brings patience. That already brings courage. This is already sublime. That's junior school. Then you get to the next level, and now you see your mind and you begin to argue with the aversion. I can't stand this problem. And you argue with it and you learn to find the way to open your mind to it. It's step by step by baby step by step by baby step. It's huge. This is practice. All of this is practice. That's why we have to understand the structure, the levels of practice, what we're capable of, you know. Because we can see many of the things that happen to us, we can't change. And that's why we literally go mad. And why we go mad is because we don't understand karma. We all believe where this, we really have no view of karma. And that's why when you hear the stories, like I told yesterday, about these young Tibetan nuns, you know, that I mentioned that when Richard Gere in 2003 invited His Holiness to New York, and he invited all these former prisoners. It was very moving, all their experiences of suffering. And these two young Tibetan nuns, you know, who'd been tortured and sexually abused for a couple of years in prison. And because for them, the view of the universe, of course it's karma, it's completely natural in their bones. So that view already is so profound. That view, just having that philosophy in the mind, is already a profound way of transforming your suffering. Already you don't suffer so much. The reason we suffer is this should not be happening to me. How dare this happen to me? This is unbearable. I cannot stand it. That's why we suffer. If we can learn to know why it's happening and we created it, it's very profound, it's very, very powerful, very grown up, it's very advanced. But this is the view of karma, you know. And so those young women had the ability to bear that suffering, had the ability to bear this outrageous suffering. They understood it, they worked with it every day. And then even on the basis of this, they had compassion for their torturers. So this is just the view of karma. It's so profound, but we hear it so wrongly, so like vindictive and blame and punitive. So if we really want to use these Buddhist tools, this is the very first one, you know. Then we can see our mind and change our mind. Then we can practice compassion and then be bodhisattvas who will greet the problems. They'd rather have problems than other ones because they're so brave, so courageous. So it's one step at a time. Each level of practice, one step at a time, one step at a time. Any other questions there?
None that I see in the chat.
Robina, I do have a question. May I ask?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Robina, I understand that this fleeting happiness, pleasure is from attachment, etc. Is our seeking that symbolic of what we're really seeking, which is the happiness and contented peace? That is our.
I think that's even making it too complicated.
Okay.
No, listen, no, that's not the point. We do want happiness. That's valid. That's not the mistake. The mistake is got the wrong view of what brings it. That's all. And we all want happiness, yes. I don't think there's anything secret in us that really hankers after this bliss of liberation. We've never heard of such a thing. We just simply know we want happy feelings. There's nothing wrong with that. Buddha says, go for it, baby. But I've got a method that'll help you get it. That's all. I don't think it's even symbolic. It's simply a fundamental. Everybody wants happiness. Everyone wants happy feelings. And all Buddha's saying is, I've got the method to help you get them. That's all. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's more simple than even that. It's more simple. It's the method. We've got the wrong methods. That's all. We've got the wrong recipe. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? No one else. Okay. So the things we're discussing here, the components, the bits and pieces that work together to produce our happiness and suffering, the components we have to look at, which is junior school and high school, lower and middle scope. All this is the nuts and bolts of Buddhist teachings, actually. The compassion wing is a completely another kettle of fish. The compassion wing is a completely different approach, but it's on the basis of success in the wisdom wing. That's why His Holiness says compassion is not enough. Compassion is the whole other approach. It's all the ability to have compassion, the ability to work on our minds and lessen self-cherishing and grow love and compassion and patience and all these things is on the basis of success in the wisdom wing. And the wisdom wing is the nuts and bolts of karma and the mind. And this is the two causes of suffering. So in junior school, you learn about karma, the first cause of suffering. And in high school, the middle scope, you learn about the mind, which is the second cause of suffering. It's the nuts and bolts of Buddhist teaching. This is the Buddhist worldview presented here, Then you add the compassion wing, but on the basis of this success in the wisdom wing. You can't just leap into the compassion wing because you have no basis. Because why? Because we have a limited view now of compassion. Our view of compassion now is based upon anger and blame. Because that's the analysis we use in our culture. Why is that dog suffering? Because the naughty man is kicking him. Why is that little girl suffering? Because the father abuses her. Why is that person suffering? Because the boss is mean to her. That's the analysis, the actual philosophical analysis we use in our world, in our materialist world, in our philosophical world, in our scientific world. That's the logic we use to say what is suffering and what is happiness. Buddha says, I'm sorry, baby, you haven't factored in all the main points. So until you got the nuts and bolts of junior school and high school, until you got the nuts and bolts of the first noble truth, the second noble truth, you can't begin to do the compassion wing. You got to get the nuts and bolts of Buddhist philosophy and psychology clear in junior school and high school. Wisdom wing, the work you do on your mind. That's the basis of success for you, then the basis of success to help others. That's the point. And that's why, again, I keep repeating, we have to understand these levels of practice. Like in any course of study you do, it's incremental, it's gradual, it's step by step. Compassion is university level. Working on your body and speech, understanding karma, the reason why things happen, which is the revelation to us. We don't have any of those answers. Is junior school. High school is looking the root of the problem, because the two causes of suffering in the second noble truth, karma and delusion, subsumed to the one, delusions. Now in high school, then you start homing in on that, understanding your mind, understanding the misconceptions, the delusions, which are the cause of why we do things to harm others, which are the cause of why we have future suffering. So it's a logical progression, in using and understand Buddha's teachings. That's practice. You can watch your breath till the cows come home. It won't help you get far. Thieves need mindfulness. If you're a Buddhist, you have to understand Buddha's views. I mean, it's just so straightforward. You can't just like gardens. We conflate liking Buddhism with knowing it. That's like conflating knowing botany with liking gardens. You'd be an idiot if you say, I'm a gardener, I like gardens. Well, who cares? You've got to know botany, dear. Then you can get a garden. Then you can fix your garden. Well, the nuts and bolts of Buddhist teachings are Buddhist psychology, how the mind works, and how karma works. This is it. This is the nuts and bolts of the first and second scopes. This is the nuts and bolts of junior school and high school. This is the nuts and bolts of the wisdom wing. This is the stuff that helps you get out of samsara into liberation. Nirvana. Then you can help others. Like, you don't wait till you've achieved it. You do it gradually, you know, step by step. So let's look at karma then, the nuts and bolts of karma. How do we create an action? What are the components that make up a negative action? Because if negative actions cause me future suffering, and hey, honey, I don't want suffering, I'd better know the analysis of a negative action, hadn't I? Don't just be nervous and superstitious and hope someone's going to come and whack you with a big stick. No, we have to understand the logic of what a negative action is, and therefore, you know, then on the basis of that, the implication is you understand what a virtuous action is. It's like learning botany. How do you know what a weed is and what a flower is? You have to know what to grow and what not to grow. So action, the word karma means action. Seems, I don't speak Sanskrit, but apparently. So, you know, as I said, there's 4 ways our past actions ripen in the present. First is the type of rebirth, which is called the fully ripened result. The second is within that rebirth, and let's say the human rebirth we've got now, the other 3 play out. The next one is called intentions or tendencies similar to the cause, the habits to keep doing them from having done them before. The third is the experience of having it happen to you. The fourth is the physical, environmental way, the way the very physical world impacts upon us. So all actions have all 4 results, not always not in every lifetime though. You might have the karmic result of non-killing by getting a human body, but you might be born with a strong tendency to kill. Look at the human planet. I mean, this is a tragedy. Most humans kill something, and most religions, even with respect, say it's okay to kill. I mean, I was taught as a Catholic that God made the creatures for our benefit, to kill, to eat, to do what we like. I mean, I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that's the view. It's not Buddha's view, that's all. So most humans kill something. And that's why it's so hard for us. I mean, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama gives refuge and lay vows in big public gatherings, the typical one is you have a vow not to kill. And first you have a vow not to kill a human. And then you have a vow not to kill other beings. His Holiness never gives it like that because he knows that most Westerners are too shocked to think you don't kill the cockroach. They're too shocked. We can't even believe it's possible to think you won't kill a cockroach, you won't kill an ant, you won't kill the vermin. It's too possible. It's so embedded in our culture that it's cool to kill. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is our history is Christian and Judaic one, going back in our world, in the materialist world, I mean the Western world, if you like, European, isn't it? Going back, well, it all goes back to Israel and those places, which is not Europe, but you know, we track our religions coming from there. So based first of all on the view that God made all the creatures and God made humans with a soul, but the other dudes didn't have one. He made them for our benefit. So from that perspective, we don't value too much the creatures. These days, a bit more we do. And then second, it's a scientific one. You know, an ant, how can an ant suffer? It's just like a chemical reaction, they say, or something. I mean, the Buddha says they're all sentient beings. They're all sentient beings. They're all mind possessors. The mind in a human is the same mind in an ant, except that due to karma, you've got an ant body and a limited ant mind. But the mind is the same mind, beginningless and endless with Buddha nature, wants happiness and doesn't want suffering. But due to karma, it's got, poor little mind is squashed into an ant's body with its limited little cognition. It's due to karma, you know. So Buddha's view is very different. So, I forget what I started saying there. I rave on so much, I can't think. Karma, okay, for the 4 ways that karma ripens. So, you know, the first one is, if you get a human life, we've got a human life due to non-killing. And as Lama Zopa says, practice in the framework of living in vows of non-killing, like a miracle. And I'll talk about this, the power of vows. We really can't get ahead of the game without vows, the Buddha says, you know. Being good is not enough, Lama Zopa says. So, but you can have a human life, but in this life, you have tendencies to kill, lie, steal, look at the world. 3, you have bad things happen to you. It was from killing, let's say. And 4, the environmental results. So all actions have any of these 4 results, but in different configurations. You might be born in this life with no tendency to lie, but you got the karma to be, the experience to be lied to. You might have the karma never to kill, but you have environmental sickness, environmental result of killing, which is you're sick and everything harms you, you got weak, you got suffering, lots of sickness. We can see this, you know. And this is why these fundamental principles of karma, if we can't even get these four clear, then we don't know how to interpret our life. No wonder we're confused. No wonder we're upset. No wonder angry. No wonder we're going crazy, because we never know the answer. Why is this happening? This is our major question of why we suffer so badly. Why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Or why is that happening out there? If we don't have a basis for answering that, and here we're using Buddhas, it's up to you to decide if you want Buddha's view. You can use Jesus's or your own. It's up to you. We're talking Buddhas here. And at least having an answer for why gives you some sanity. I mean, if you don't know botany, you've never heard of such a law, and you're in the tropics, you know, I mean, in the tropics, everything just grows, and before you know it, it'll be eating up your house. Big plants grow underneath, the roots come up, and you're panicking. Why is this happening? Because you've never heard of botany. No wonder you're panicking. No wonder you're suffering. Same with karma. But having the view of karma, and you decide to use it as your working hypothesis, this already is the basis of sanity and clarity and confidence, that you know at least have an answer why. Now you can apply it in your life. But it's up to you to decide to do that. You know? Not as believing in karma, that's intellectual laziness. It's not helpful. Believing in botany won't help you get a garden. That's why, as I said, we conflate liking with knowing. This is a major point in our culture. We like Buddhism. Due to past connection with Buddhism, we meet it again. And oh, yeah, it's wonderful. I love Buddhism. What good is that? Liking it's not enough. Doesn't help you. It'll run out unless you keep practicing it. That's why His Holiness is always telling us to study it. That's what he means, you know. Study sounds so serious. I've got to study Buddhism. What? I've got to go to a philosophical course. No, just understand the few nuts and bolts about karma and the mind. This is how you navigate your life. This is the point, you know. It's up to us. That's why the centers exist, to give us these classes, you know. So, okay, karma ripens in 4 ways. If you look at these 4 ways, it's your entire life. 1, the type of body you've got, fully ripened result. In our case, human. The fruit of virtue, fruit of non-killing, like we won the lottery. How amazing. 2nd, the tendencies in the mind of that person in this human body. They're your tendencies from before. 3, your experiences. Basically, broadly speaking, how you're seen and treated by others. We're very social beings, aren't we? This is a stupendously big one. 4th, the way the physical world impacts upon you. That's it. There's nothing left, is there? There's the physical world you live in, all the people and sentient beings you meet, your own tendencies in your own body. That's it. There's nothing left. Karma explains all of this. The logic of karma too is it's a natural, this is a crucial point too. It's a crucial one, crucial to get. Buddha is not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. We don't need creating. Our minds are beginningless. You don't need creating, for God's sake. And we don't need punishing and rewarding, because everything we think and do and say brings its own results. We're the boss. We harm ourselves. We punish. We give ourselves happiness. We give ourselves suffering. Knowing this is already a revelation. They say the bodhisattvas have the greatest compassion for us on this planet because we have absolutely no idea about the law of cause and effect. That's the Buddha's view. We're looking everywhere else for the causes of our happiness and everywhere else for the causes of our suffering. We go mad, you know. It's right here, Buddha says. So it's not punishment, not reward, and it's not coming from a creator, it's not coming from revelation. It's natural law. That's a shocking thing to think about. Like we know that botany is natural law, gravity is natural law, and we know that the scientist, this is an interesting point, this is a major point, a scientist doesn't invent botany. A clever person has come along and observed gardens, basically, has observed what already exists. Botanists don't make up something and then plonk it on top of gardens. All they've done is observe with their intelligence the workings of a garden and have articulated the laws that they have codified. That's it. That's what Buddha does. Karma is a natural law. It's not punishment. It's not reward. There's no such concept in Buddhism. It's not made up by Buddha. He's observed, with his mind, he's observed the workings of the universe, but at a more subtle level, because he can observe the mind. That's Buddha's expertise, observing the minds of and the actions of sentient beings from infinite past lives. That's the point. We go back into the past in science, well, so does Buddha, except it's going back into the past of people's minds. That's Buddha's expertise. It's way more sophisticated than we can imagine, you know, with respect to us. So it's this natural law that runs the universe. It's the law within which the universe runs. Put it that way. All sentient beings. And of course, Buddha is asserting far more sentient beings than we would imagine. The humans are a miniature percentage of all sentient beings. Even the animals are a miniature percentage. if we compare with the spirits. And even that's a miniature percentage if we compare with the hell realms. This is the Buddha's view. You know? So the trillions upon countless, trillions upon countless, trillions upon countless, trillions of sentient beings. And all those minds are beginningless and endless. All those minds want to be happy and don't want to suffer. All those minds are experiencing the fruit of their past actions. All those minds possess Buddha nature. Buddhist psychology refers to all of these minds, not just humans. It's quite radical. You know? So a complete action, one that brings a type of rebirth, has to have 4 things in place. It's much more nuanced than this. There's more detail to it, but this is a simple way of putting it. So a simple action, a conscious intentional action of non-killing is not just some abstract, I'm not killing. There's no karma there. Karma, it has to involve the mind. This is a really central point. The real meaning of the word action, karma, is intentional action, mental action. Any action starts with the mind. Now, most of the things we do are instinctive because we've programmed our minds from infinite past lives. We don't think there's intention. We just call it instinct. Well, instinct for the Buddha is just the habit of having thought or said or done something that often that is now its second nature. That's instinct. I mean, we basically have perfected, you know, all the delusions, and we perfected the actions that come on the basis of the delusions with our body and speech out of habit. So we have to unpack those habits, and that's a tough job. So the first type of karma, the fully ripened result, a type of rebirth. So I use a simple example of this particular life we've got. One of our many virtuous karmic seeds of non-killing in our non-karmic, in our virtuous bank vault was triggered the time before we stopped breathing. It's quite specific. And it's an action of non-killing, bare bones, action of non-killing. So so in order to drop one of those seeds into your main bank vault, there have to be 4 things in place when you do that action of non-killing. So the first one has to be, when you do an action of non-killing, it's got to be an object there of the action. And obviously, an object of non-killing is a sentient being, isn't it? That mouse in your kitchen, something as simple as that. That's the first thing, the object. Next is the mind involved in it. This is the way to put it. The mind involved in that action. And this is the central piece. You can argue without that, there's no karma. You could argue that. And I'll explain. So there's actually more than 2, but I'll just keep it simple. There are 2 main parts there. 2 bits of your mind involved. First one, this is the meaning of karma. Mental action is intention, the word intention. And that doesn't mean here how we use it as good intention. That's called motivation. We'll use these as a distinction here. Motivation means the reason why you do. The intention is what you decide. I will not kill that mouse. That has to be in your mind if it's going to become an action of non-killing. Volition. I will not kill that mouse. I must be careful not to kill the mouse. But that's just bare bones. Intention. The thing that gives it its flavor, the thing that it gives it its character, the thing that it causes it to become either virtuous or non-virtuous is the motivation that impels you to not kill the mouse. That's the key factor, and we'll call it here the motivation. So obviously, in an unusual scenario, the motivation is compassion. You don't want the poor little mouse to suffer. That's a pretty classic example of a virtuous action, isn't it? But what makes it virtuous is motivation. Third is you do the action. You catch the mouse. Fourth is little mouse is happy and it's living and you release it. Thank you, Robina. Bye, happy mouse. Simply speaking, that qualifies as a complete virtuous action. There's more to it than that. But simply speaking, that qualifies as a virtuous action of non-killing. And you drop a complete seed into your complete bank vault that will then produce eventually, happy rebirths, such as a human. We need bucket loads of them in our bank vault. We need bucket loads of those rich, delicious, intentional. But the added thing here, when we talk about vows, they're not very strong. Why? Because our motivation is not so strong. Our compassion is not so strong. So even the fully ripened, the complete actions we do of saving that mouse, saving the ant, are not really that powerful because the motivation is quite weak. I mean, we're happy to save 1 ant, but if you've got 4,000 ants on your kitchen sink, excuse me, you've got to have a lot of patience and a lot of genuine, stable compassion to want to take off every single little ant without harming them. We would give up after 1,000 ants. 1 ant, we're prepared. This is why I remember one of my friends, one of our dear friends, a meditator, Tuptim Pemo, a nun in California, meditated for many years. And she was living up in Big Sur, one of Rinpoche's big retreat center near Big Sur, up in the bush. Rinpoche said it's about 500 acres that someone gave Rinpoche years ago, and you've got to walk there several hours. It's so isolated. And Rinpoche said even the birds are quiet. It's a perfect place for retreat, 500 acres of place, and people are there in long, many-year retreats. So she was there for quite a while. And so, of course, you take all your supplies with you, your sacks of flour and your sacks of this and blah, blah. Anyway, whatever happened, I forget exactly, but a little moth. A moth is the result of a little previous creature, isn't it? Anyway, never mind. She had a lot of moths. I mean, maybe come from her bag of rice or flour, whatever. She had millions of moths in the house. I mean, thousands of moths, maybe hundreds of moths. Well, Rinpoche was so moved when she explained to Rinpoche what she did. She spent days, maybe weeks, I don't know, each moth, she had a little cup, each moth, catch the little moth, blow mantra, go outside, release it. Now, who's got that kind of patience? So we're not that virtuous. You think you're so holy because you save one moth. 100 moths, 200 moths, I'm sorry. Then we give an excuse, I've got to kill them. They're vermin, they're this, they're making my life unhappy, blah, blah. So we don't have that much compassion with respect to us. So our actions are fairly quite weak. So we need to do those actions in the framework of vows, which I'll talk about later. That gives tremendous power and Buddha loves his vows, and I'll explain the logic later. Okay. So there's complete action of non-killing. I just described one, and that's called a virtuous one. Now, this is the power of motivation. Let's say I'm having Gus come for dinner, and I know he loves nice, fresh, lightly cooked, rare mice flesh. So I see a mouse in the kitchen, and you look at me, you'll see me going, oh, little mouse, don't hurt it. You'll think, isn't Robina so compassionate? No. She wants to save the mouse for later to kill it, to cook fresh mice for Gus for dinner. I mean, I know it's a joke, but hear the point. And that's attachment. The fisherman looks kind. A fisherman doesn't look like he's being mean. He's not thinking, I'm going to hate that fish. I'm going to destroy that fish. I want to even save the mouse, but only so I can kill it later. Hear my point. What's my motivation there? Intention looks lovely. I'm going to save the mouse. What for? So I can kill it later. So, I'm just giving you an example how motivation, attachment, it's a negative action. Right there. Now, another example to show how powerful motivation is. Let's say, the mouse, you realize you stood on the mouse and you see it in agonizing pain. Well, we all know the first thing we want to do is kill the mouse because we call it putting it down. We do it to our grandmother. We call it euthanasia, a fancy Greek word. We call killing your grandma. Why? And this is an interesting point. So what's going on? 1, that's your grandma. 2, that's the object. 2, intention. I will kill my grandma. 2B. 2A is intention. I will kill my grandma. 2B, motivation. We know it's compassion. It's a really interesting point. It's compassion. Of course it is. You can't bear the thought of your grandma suffering, so you must put her down. We don't say that. We do euthanasia. We'll make it fancy, Greek. 3, you kill your grandma. 4, the result, she's dead. That's a complete action of killing, isn't it? But look at the motivation. You meant well. Now, as Lama Zopa says, I'm sorry, meaning well is not enough. And this is a really major point. First of all, you can say the motivation was sort of virtuous. It was virtuous. You didn't want your grandma to suffer. And because you have the typical view of the world, that when grandma's dead, her consciousness is dead, so suffering is over. But no, Buddha says, her mind will continue. And in fact, at the time you kill her, the karmic seed in her mind, that's the most prevalent one, and you'd have no certainty whether that seed is negative or positive because you're not clairvoyant. So therefore, you can have no certainty that at the time your grandma dies, that you have no certainty that a negative seed might not have been triggered, and that when her mind leaves her body, she went from the frying pan into the fire and took a lower realm rebirth. There's no certainty because you're not clairvoyant. Now, we don't like to hear that because it's hard for us to even imagine. We're so fixated on the present suffering, and we're so used to the idea that grandma is just physical, and if that suffering ceases, then her suffering ceases, period. No, Buddha says. Whether it's the mouse or the ant or your grandma, it's the same. So as Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. You need wisdom. So simply because, in the same way, that if I've got a headache and you have such compassion for me, but you can't remember whether the pill is cyanide or aspirin, I'm sorry, you will never dare play Russian roulette with my headache. You'd rather me have a headache than risk me dying an agonizing death because you give me the cyanide instead. That I am dying. You say, oh, I meant well, Robina. Well, thanks a lot. Mind your own business. Leave me with my headache. So please don't play Russian roulette with your mouse or your grandma or your pussycat or your doggy woggy, which is what we do. I know I say things so rudely and bluntly. I'm trying to be clear, okay? No, not yet, not question yet. So
There are questions in the
I know, but not yet.
Oh,
Not yet. Not yet. Keep your questions. I'm going to complete this little discussion. Then I'm so happy to have questions. Okay. So again, I'm talking technical things here, not moralistic, not heavy, not punitive. Okay. So motivation is in fact the key thing that determines the character of the seed you plant in your pop in your bank vault. So you can argue that killing the mouse or your grandmother with incredible compassion, and you have to say it is compassion, but it's not informed by wisdom, but it's still compassion, but it's limited, then you have to say that you don't create much negative karma. You have to say that is logical. But the question is this is the really crucial point. There's two people in this scenario. One is you and one is your grandma. Now, what motivated you to kill your grandma or your pussy, which is the more normal one, or your doggy woggy, what motivated you was sincere compassion. You really did mean well. You really did have compassion. There's no doubt. But so for you, what's the consequence? Not too bad. For you, fine. Now, excuse me, why did you kill your cat? For the cat's sake. So you have to ask the question. You must ask the question, and we never do. I wonder if I did benefit my pussycat. And what that means is, I wonder if I made sure when my pussycat died that a virtuous karmic seed in my pussycat's mind was triggered so that my pussycat, when it's left this body, will take a good human rebirth and meet the Dalai Lama and have a spiritual practice. If you can answer yes, then not only did you have compassion, but you also had wisdom. Not only did you create a virtuous karmic action, you also helped your grandma or the mouse. But we do not, so fine for us, but what about your pussycat? What about your grandma? That's the thing to consider. And all of that obviously is based on the Buddhist logic that your mind continues. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm just giving you the Buddha's view, you know. This is the basis of making decisions. So if you really want to help your cat, you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to have wisdom. It's not enough just to stop the present suffering. You can't be certain that that pussy won't take another suffering rebirth, in which case you've put the pussy from the frying pan into the fire. But from your side, you didn't do too bad. You created some kind of almost virtuous karma, but it's not enough to just have compassion. You've got to have wisdom. This is a really crucial point to think about. And it's in common sense in daily life, like the aspirin example. You know, if you cannot be certain which is cyanide and which is aspirin, you will leave me with my headache and you'll help me the best you can. You will not just leap in and make a decision because you mean well. And that's unfortunately what we do. So now I think I want you to ask questions about that point specifically, because it touches everybody, you know. Half the people in this room have killed their pussy and their doggy. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to discuss it for the future for you. So now ask me some questions, please, about this point. You said there were some questions, Teresa. Have I silenced you from asking questions? Huh? Teresa, you said there were questions.
Yes, not specifically about that point, but I'm happy to share them.
No, not yet. I want to know if there are questions about this point. If there are, if not, we'll continue.
Yeah, it looks like Ariane.
Good. Go on. What's the question? What's the question?
Yeah.
What's the question?
Okay.
Go, sweetheart. What's the question?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I had heard that if you say a mantra when your animal is dying, that helps
Of course it
to
does.
generate.
Oh,
cultivate a
amazing.
seed.
So special. Of course it is. Incredible way to help your animals. That's right. But just don't stick your nose in and kill it. That's all.
Oh, okay, so
your own karma. Of course, there's so, I mean, Lama Zopa's book,
oh.
How to Face Death Without Fear, is incredible, detailed information about exactly how to help your loved ones before they die, exactly how to help the pussycat, the doggy woggy, the ant, all the beings die as well as they possibly can. And there's many things to think, but got nothing to do with killing them. It's just it's interfering in the most kind of aggressive way. To think about it very bluntly, it's you know, it's so difficult for us though, Ariane, isn't it? I mean, we assume that it's our job to kill that animal. But I mean, all I'm trying to tell you is, it's not as if, oh, you shouldn't kill, you're naughty. It's not as simple as that. It's simply, you don't, if the logic is, if you don't know the consequence, in ordinary daily life, we get this. If we do not know, if we cannot be certain of the consequences of an action we do, especially if the consequences can be dire, then we know logically we would not do the action. If you cannot be certain that a car is coming around that corner on the freeway, you would not send your 5-year-old daughter across the road. You know with certainty you would not give me a pill unless you were certain it wasn't cyanide. There's so many examples in daily life. We are cautious, we're intelligent, but as soon as it comes to the one of killing animals, because we have a view that its mind ends at death. So this is where we have to factor in, if we want to, the possibility, the Buddhist view, that the mind continues. Then the whole scenario changes, the whole logic of it changes. If you don't have confidence that the consequences of your action won't be dire for that sentient being, then don't do it. But there's a multitude of ways you can help the mouse and your grandmother die really well. There's so many ways. And this is where I think what happens is we have so much, our own fear and our own attachment kicks in and messes up our compassion, because we frankly can't stand to see that suffering. We panic and then we feel responsible. So we feel we have to kill the cat, kill the dog, kill the auntie. But there's a multitude of ways of helping your cat die peacefully. Put the little pussy cat in a safe place, especially your dog. Dogs adore you. So put your dog in a really safe place. Put the little bird, the little mouse in a really safe place. Put mantras on day and night. Have medicine Buddha mantra. It puts incredibly powerful imprints in the mind of that little animal. It doesn't know it. It can't do anything. It can't help itself, but it puts powerful imprints into the mind of the animal. It connects it with the Buddha. Then every second of suffering it has, but still in a safe place, being safe, feeling secure, no paranoia, no fear. They're not on the road being eaten alive by another creature. They're feeling safe and secure. Then allow the cat to die at its own pace, helping it as much as you can. Give it a little pill to stop the pain. Let it hear mantras. Feel safe. Love it. Help it be secure. There's so many ways you can help your grandmother as well. This is the best way to die. What do you think?
You're right about it. It's our pain and seeing somebody in a lot of pain. It's like,
that's right.
You kind of oh, I don't want him to have that kind of pain. I got to do something.
And that's often attachment. It's not based on wisdom. It's panic. You know, it's like panic. We can't cope, and we don't have many methods, so we just have to hope it'll all go away.
Yeah.
We don't like to see that part of ourselves, but that's definitely there. I'd suggest. You know.
Thank you.
And it's such an important topic. You know, so interesting. Any other questions, people? Other questions? None. Okay, so it seems to be clear.
Oh, I will.
Yeah, good, darling. Good.
Yeah. Yes. Hi. Thank you, Venerable. You know, people don't like to talk about death in the West.
That's right. We don't exactly. I suggest we. It's we. We in the West. We in the West do not like death. We cannot stand death. And why? It's because we don't know what's going to happen, so we live in denial of it, isn't it?
We have no coping skills. We are not taught anything in terms. When I first heard about the bardo, I was like, oh my gosh, there's things that you can learn about of what happens to you during dying. And it's kind of mind-blowing that you see so much fear in people who are.
Is there a question, darling? Or you just want to say something?
Yes. Yeah, no, the question is that, you know, how best to work with people who are dying, who don't have a concept of karma and past life. I mean,
be loving and kind and make them safe and make them secure and make them less fearful, and be kind and loving and praise them and thank them for living a good life so they'll die more peacefully. Buddha Lama Zopa's book is so clear that how to face death without fear. It's very precise. At the time of death, fear kicks in really powerfully for animals, for humans, for everybody. So the crucial thing is at the time of death, when the karmic seed that will determine the person's next life, that is triggered by a really powerful level of fear and grasping. So at that time is when they need our help to enable them to be calm and peaceful, and then virtuous thoughts can be triggered, and then those virtuous thoughts in the mind can be the trigger for the virtuous karmic seed, which will determine their future good life. That's the key thing to do, whether it's a mouse or your grandmother. Now, added, if your grandmummy loves God, you can talk about God, talk about heaven. If your grandmother's a Buddhist, you talk about karma. You have to be skillful and wise to know the person's mind, but the fundamental point is to help them be calm, relaxed, easygoing, and therefore virtuous. And when the mind is virtuous, that enables a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, which will give them a good future life. That's the technology of it. The bardo is advanced. Most people wouldn't have a clue about the bardo, but to know how to die and how to help other people die, and that's including the mouse. It's so important. And Lama Zopa's book is so clear about that, lays it all out, and all the different practices we can do that can be so beneficial for dying people. Lee, such a good point, darling. Thank you so much. Yes, people. Yes, Teresa.
In the chat, there's a question. If a person has just passed away and a doctor, not a Buddhist, is on the way to confirm death and will probably touch various parts of the body, etc., does it help to gently touch the person's crown to encourage consciousness to exit from above?
Yeah, that's part of the things to do. But the ideal scenario is don't call the doctors. Don't call the doctor immediately. It's the first thing we do. We panic. If your loved one's at home, the ideal scenario is, let them stay there for 1 or 2 days, as long as it's within the laws of your country. Don't rush and call the ambulance and call the doctor. That's the first thing we do. This is the most crucial thing for the Buddhist approach. The Tibetan Buddhists, the Mahayana, the Vajrayana Buddhists, at least 3 days is the ideal scenario to have practices day and night, because it takes up to 3 days for the mind to leave. But if you're forced into that, so in the book, there's these different, the final stages of all the advice is, the first part is what to do the weeks and months before death, then what to do the days before death, then what to do at the time of death, and then what to do once the person has stopped breathing. So there's various scenarios: what to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do if your loved one dies in hospital, what to do if your loved one dies suddenly, what to do if your loved one's giving their organs, these different scenarios. So the ideal one is to die at home. I mean, to die in a hospital is probably the worst place to die. You need to be peaceful and virtuous and calm. You don't have long, you have half an hour if you're lucky. So the ideal scenario is to be at home. You can rotate people coming in and doing prayers. And then the 3 days, you check the mind is still left. If it hasn't left, you can then do this business of tapping. There's all this discussion about things. But in a hospital, the best you've got is a half an hour. So if you don't just rush in and call the doctor, if you have to, if you've got no choice in the hospital, but that's when, if it's a hospital your loved one's dying in, or an institution, then you deal with them beforehand. You keep your wits about you, and you discuss with the doctors, you discuss with the nurses that if your loved one does die, can I have the bed as long as possible? I mean, if it's some places might have a space, some places maybe only got 30 minutes. If you've got your own room, if you're rich enough to have your own private room, then lock the door and have 3 days there, and you do prayers and practices all that time. There's many things you can do. But if you have only a 30 minutes, there's practices and prayers you can do. And then, of course, if they have to take the body, you've got no choice. Then you can do certain things like tap up here, which can encourage the consciousness to leave from here, which can be quite useful. There's many of these things in this book, many things to do. It's so helpful to have this book. It's so practical. The whole book started years ago when Lama Zopa was teaching. This is back in 2003 in France. And one of his students, an old student, came and said, my father just died and I didn't know what to do. And he's quite shocked, because this is a fundamental teaching in Buddhism, because we all, as Lee says, we all don't like death. We can't cope with death. We live in denial of it, so we don't know how to prepare it. So she didn't know what to do, so she panicked. So anyway, he changed tack and he decided to teach this book. So it's not the only thing. And then it's published. And it's this handbook of what to do to help your loved ones who are sick and then dying, before, at the time, after, and even the days after that, even the 49 days after. It's all this chronological order and all the different practices and things, and the attitude, the approach to have, whether it's a mouse, an ant, or a human, It's so practical, so helpful, so necessary. As Lama Zopa says, it's education we all need, Yeah. What other questions there, darling?
I'm sorry, Robina, I have another question.
Good,
May I ask? Eileen, may I ask?
Yes.
Is euthanasia, whether we euthanize ourselves or the cat or the dog or someone else, are we interfering
What, darling?
Are we interfering with our own karma, somebody else's, by taking that step? Is that part of it?
That's what I'm talking about. That's just the analogy I had. You see me with a headache. This is the analogy. You see me with a headache. You do have compassion, but you rush in and have no certainty that the pill is cyanide or aspirin. That's exactly what I'm saying. So on our own emotion and attachment and fear, but also compassion, you rush in without certainty of the consequences of the pill you will give me. So of course you're interfering. But listen, Eileen, interfering based on wisdom and compassion, that's called helping somebody. That's good. But help has to be based on wisdom. Meaning well is just not enough. You can't just rush in and mean well, you'll make a mess. That's the whole point. Interfering, nothing wrong, but it's got to be based on wisdom, Eileen, knowing the consequences will be appropriate. So you could argue the highest beings who have incredible power, incredible clairvoyance, incredible wisdom, incredible compassion. You could argue they know exactly what's going on, so they can make a wise decision that would be genuinely for the benefit of that person. Let me give you an example. This is shocking for our world. Years ago in Kolpan Monastery, our monastery in Kathmandu, Lama Yeshe, my teacher, who's passed away now, Lama Zopa's guru, he was there. And my friend Harry, an American guy, he was trying to help one of the Sherpa monks at the monastery who was very sick. So he told Lama, he found a doctor. So he told Lama Yeshe he'd found a doctor. Well, Lama Yeshe, who was Harry's teacher, he said, well, he doesn't need a doctor, leave him alone, he's fine. So Harry trusted Lama. So meanwhile, Harry noticed the monk was getting sicker and sicker, and he eventually went up to his family up in the mountains. He was a Sherpa, and he died. Now, you could argue that Lama Yeshe was completely cruel, allowed a person to die, and didn't even encourage him to get a doctor. That looks like that. Can you see what I'm saying? But as Lama Lundub, the abbot, said to Harry, of course, you know that Lama Yeshe is clairvoyant. Lama Yeshe is he's got wisdom. He realizes exactly what's going on. He has perfect compassion for this monk. He knows his mind exactly. And of course, we don't think this way. That means he sees his past karma. He sees exactly the past action that this monk had done that caused this particular sickness. He saw exactly that if this monk had had a doctor, he would have got better. He would have had a fine life. But the particular karma he created could have been 47 lives ago. But Lama could see this with his wisdom. This is the whole point about the great bodhisattvas. They've got this level of wisdom. So he could see exactly that this particular karma, that if he'd gotten better, he would have been fine, but his next life would have been much worse suffering. So on the other hand, by having that suffering, finishing the karma, because that's the whole point about suffering and happiness. Happiness is the fruit of virtue. Suffering is the fruit of negativity. So every second of suffering you have, you've just finished that negative seed. You're cleaning up your suffering. You're cleaning it up. So then by having that suffering, he purified his karma. He went back up to his family. He died a really peaceful death. That thus purified all that karma, and next life, fantastic. Now, that's a level of wisdom and perspective that we do not have. And that's a perfect example. Lama Yeshe, because he had the wisdom, he was able to make a decision that looked in the short term like this poor man was suffering, but he had the bigger picture and was able to see that by having that suffering, he finished the karma and thus left next life fantastic. That's a pretty intense example. So we don't have much wisdom, in other words. You get my point here?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. What else, people?
Yes, there's several questions coming in. The next one, how do we avoid killing when all of our actions likely link back to killing? Even with a plant-based diet, the plants are likely grown with pesticides that killed insects.
Exactly. I know it's a really, really, really good point. And it's important to get this big picture. You know, it's so important. When we realize, and this is what part of Buddha's point, that the very nature of this universe we live in, it's fraught with suffering. Just by existing, we know we harm countless sentient beings, even without intention, just by breathing, by walking, by driving. Our body is a walking zoo, is a living zoo, you know. Every single tiny thing we do will harm others. So at least we can be, so the point is to at least every day to have the wish, the thought, not to harm others to the best of our ability, not having the fantasy that if, let's say, you stop eating meat, suddenly you're like a saint and nobody suffers. That's completely nonsense. I mean, even, you know, sometimes, and even the growing of vegetables, forget the insecticide. I mean, there's always, you know, examples where you might have a mouse plague in some, I remember one person, scientist in Australia, talking about some wheat field. And in the off season, when there's no wheat, this mouse plague, millions of these little field mice. So of course, what do you have to do when you grow the wheat? You slaughter the mice. And then we tend to think, you know, you can't avoid it, in other words. So that doesn't mean you die, doesn't mean you stop breathing, doesn't mean you stop eating, but become conscious that our very presence can harm others. So all we can do within that is the best not to harm others. And that's why living in vows is so powerful. We'll discuss that later, you know. So the very least we can do is prevent ourselves as much as we can from doing actions that harm others, knowing that so much we do does harm others. But then we can increase our compassion, we can increase our awareness. This is powerful, you know, and enormous compassion can come from this. All we can do is do that. What can we do? And of course, I mean, if we can give up meat, because the meat industry is absolutely monstrous, it's destroying the planet. You hear these things, but don't think you're being so holy and perfect just because you don't eat meat. It's true. And the insecticide, so many beings die driving the car, Even I remember I remember Googling how many creatures die on the road, how many bugs. And some fellow in Holland had done the research, something like just on a number plate, per kilometer, per car, whatever, trillions of little beings are slaughtered, So all we can do is factor this in and do the best we can. Not say, oh, well, can't help it. Not like that. It's quite, and the more we have compassion, the more we're going to see. This is the nature of the universe. But living in vows is a powerful way to protect us, at least ourselves. And then we become more compassionate, more conscious, It's very powerful. What else, people? Questions?
What about abortion is a question.
Well, let's analyze what it means. I always use the example of my own abortion because it's always very direct when you talk about your own experience, and it's a good one because lots of women have abortions and a lot of people carry a lot of guilt and shame about it. Well, I was 23, living in London. I was a hippie, 1968. I'll never forget. And I remember the moment I got pregnant, I knew I was pregnant, and I knew that second. This is a really good example of how karma works, how karmic connections with people work. It's a very interesting example. So, okay, what does that mean? I got pregnant. I even knew the second I was with that boy, I was this hippie, right? I'm not trying to be too detailed here, but giving you the example. That second I knew, I thought, oh no, I'm pregnant. I knew it immediately. A lot of women say that, they know that. That means the consciousness came in at that moment. There I was with this boy, the egg and sperm came together, that consciousness grabbed the opportunity and came running. That's the beginning of a person. So who's that person in my womb? That was a person with whom I had strong karmic connection from past lives. God knows which karmic. God knows 1,000 lives ago, it could have been 50 lives ago, could have been whatever. So that person, whoever it was, had died recently, and then they were in this intermediate state, and then due to the karma, I hopped into bed with that boy, the condition came, their mind came running. That person won the lottery. They got a human body. They must have created the cause from non-killing in the past. They got the fully ripened result of non-killing. They got a human body. But now, the third kind of karma, the experience similar to the cause, in their case, of past killing, they got killed by me. They created the cause. They created the cause to come to my womb due to non-killing. They got the human body, but due to another bank vault of karma of killing in this case. Sorry, they got the human body due to their own non-killing. They came to my womb. Then the third way of karma, they've got the third type of result of karma called the experience similar to the cause of killing. Now look at the human planet. Many people die young. Many people get killed. Well, this little person got killed. By whom? By me, with the help of the doctors and nurses. So that makes it heavier. So I killed a little sentient being, but they created the cause to get killed. So there's this karmic connection between us. They must have killed me in the past. So, that's how karma works. And for me, it was so clear. I never made any doubt. I was so clear I was going to do it. The karma was very clear. That shows there was a very strong connection between us. I made the decision. I went to the hospital. I remember I got it for free because the National Health paid for abortions at that time. I just approved, the National Health in England had just approved abortion. So I felt very lucky, But so then that's the karma between me and the fetus, that sentient being. So I created the cause. I killed that person. It's called a human being. Okay, it's not a viable one. It's a little baby one, but there's a consciousness there. That's what makes it a human. Consciousness entered into that egg and sperm, and it was about 12 weeks when I had the abortion. So that's when you do the 4 opponent powers. You do the purification practice, which we'll talk about, because there's no karma you can't purify. So there's karma between me and this person, very strong. They came to my womb. Then due to their karma of past killing, and the tendency in my mind to kill, I never had that thought before or since, ever. I never got pregnant before or since. I never had the thought to kill a human being before or since. I mostly never thought to kill anything, actually. But in that case, it's very clear. So that's called killing a human being. But we can purify. There's no karma we can't purify. But the sentient being, you see, often what happens when we have guilt, I'm a bad person. I killed this innocent person. That person in my womb was not innocent. Anything ever happens to us, we create the cause for it to happen. If that little sentient being did not have the karma to be killed, even if I'd tried to have an abortion, it would not have died. So the main reason that fetus died was not because I killed it. It's because it had the karma to die. The catalyst for it dying was me getting the doctors and the nurses to do it, That's the way to describe. It's very interesting. So there's my answer. What else?
All right. The next question that came in, can you ask what Buddhists think about organ donation, and is it okay?
This is a very fascinating question, which comes up in Lama Zopa's book. So it's a great discussion to have. Okay. First of all the lamas will praise unbelievably this idea of incredible compassion that you want to offer your organs after you've died. Every lama I've ever heard or spoken to, they praise this as so beneficial. And Lama Zopa praises it hugely in his book. But this is what's fascinating. I think Lamas, I didn't know the details of what happened until I had to edit this book. Lama Zopa didn't know the details. So there's this vague idea that that they allow you to die. And then eventually when your mind has left the body, which can take up to 3 days for Buddhism, then they take your organs. No, it's not like that. And this is what was so fascinating. I read a book while I was editing this book. I read a book by this American medical journalist called Nick Teresi. It's most fascinating. It's called The Undead, not about zombies. He's a very wonderful, funny fellow, a medical journalist in the States. And it's all about the difficulties and the problems that are now existing in the medical profession and all the conflicts and discussions about when is death. And people are now seriously questioning their assumptions, which I think is amazing. One of the problems is people who come back to life. I think over the centuries in all cultures, there are reports, isn't there, of people coming back to life, quote unquote. Even in the victorious times in England, people put a bell in the coffin in case you came alive and you ring the bell. Excuse me, I'm still alive. It sounds hilarious, but this is such a common thing. But of course, the materialist view doesn't know how to factor in people coming back to life after they're technically dead. So we just put it in the too hard basket. You understand? But this is what's fascinating. So he said there's so much confusion now in the West. No one knows when death is. People coming back to life and they didn't expect it. And so one of the most fascinating bits, he had a whole chapter, this man, on out-of-body experiences of people on the operating table. Everybody knows all over the world, there are reports of people having what we call out-of-body experiences. Technically, you're not leaving your body, but it's your subtle mind. So remember in the Vajrayana, you've got gross consciousness, which is what we have right now, our sensory and access to some of our mental consciousness. Then when that stops, by the time you stop breathing, that's what we call death. You're not dead yet. That's just the gross consciousness and the gross body have ceased. And this is the big point in Buddhism. So that's when they plug you in and they keep you breathing and keep you all toasty and warm and breathing and your heart beating and your brain functioning or something. And it looks like you're a living person. But and the fact is, the Buddhist view is you are a living person, but your gross consciousness has ceased. If you turned off those machines, you would stop breathing again. So they're keeping you breathing. And if the Western view, they're calling you dead. But you're not dead. As Lama Zopa says, if the heart can still beat and the person can still breathe and the body can be warm, this is proof that the subtle mind is still there. And this is what we've got to factor in, the possibility of subtle consciousness here. So interesting in this guy in this book, one chapter, and he's very funny, he cracked jokes all the time, he's very good. He had a whole chapter on people who reported during their operation this experience of floating above their body, watching what the doctors were doing, and then reporting later what they saw. So most doctors, most medical profession does are cynical about that and say, don't be ridiculous, not possible. You're unconscious, not possible. But of course, he didn't know about the Buddhist view, but this is exactly fitting with the Buddhist view. This is your subtle consciousness. So people report this thing like this all the time. People leave their bodies, people are floating, and they call it astral travel. You technically don't leave your body, but it's your subtle consciousness. It does not depend upon a brain, does not depend upon the senses, does not depend upon a body. It's the capacity of your subtle mind to have experiences. People have this in their dreams, clairvoyant experiences, people traveling all over the place, going here and there. You're not actually going, you're not leaving your body, you're still in your body, but the experience of it is as if you're somewhere else. That's called clairvoyance. And we don't even know why we've got it, but people have it. It fits with the Buddhist view. So he joked, there was one particular woman who had to have such a radical procedure that they had to cut out her, that they had to almost make her almost like she was dead in order to do this very sensitive procedure on her brain. So that there's no way from their point of view that she could have been conscious in any way. But he said it was funny because she reported the most vivid out of body experience. So they cannot argue with this. But of course, they'd have to shrug their shoulders. They don't know what it means, you know. And I remember there's one doctor reported in this book who's in this industry. He said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but this much I can say. That's brilliant. At least we're questioning our assumptions now. So, okay, the Buddhist view is this. Your mind is still there. Now, in the same way that woman could have a vivid experience of seeing what's going on, even though she's under anesthetic. It's exactly the same possibility for a person whose subtle mind is still there. And while they're on the operating table, when they're technically dead by the Western view, but their mind is still there, then they can be just like the person in the under the anesthetic. That person's subtle mind, because it's still there, some people can have the experience of also observing what they're doing, and therefore that could cause them to freak out. So the key point is this, before I finish the story, the key point about this is the point you've been asking. At the time of death, the crucial thing is, before you stop breathing, the particular, and this is all described in great detail, and Lama Zopa describes it in the book, there's this technical procedure that occurs at the time before you stop breathing, when this particular level, intense grasping, intense fear kicks in before you stop breathing. And that's the trigger that then triggers the karmic seed that will be the one that at that point already determines your next life. So in our case, we can deduce that a virtuous karmic seed was triggered that programmed us. We're not even left the previous body yet. It programmed us already to go to our present mother's human womb. So we have to deduce we must have died fairly virtuously and fairly peacefully, because when you're beginning to die, this grasping, which is still very strong, if the mind is relatively virtuous and you're hearing prayers and people are around you doing positive things, it would, in our case, it triggered a virtuous karmic seed. And so we got a human body. Now that can happen for the person, let's say this lady I'm about to tell you about on the operating table, when she's technically dead for the West, she decided to offer her organs. Lama Zopa says, this is amazing, such compassion, guaranteed to have a peaceful death. But what happens is this. On the operating table, the nurse reported, who watched the heartbeat on the monitor, was monitoring the heartbeat. She reported this particular woman, as they got the circular saw to cut her from head to toe, to open up her body, to take out her organs, her heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. So as the author said, cracking a joke, I wonder what a dead person has to be worried about. So that, for me, I'm just my own speculation based on this system, that she must have had one of those out-of-body experiences, and she's technically dead, but her subtle mind is there, and she's observing what's going on. So of course she's going to freak out. She's not dead yet. And so she's seeing them cutting her open. She knows she's going to give her organs, and she's having a panic attack thinking, my God, you know, I'm not dead yet. What don't they realize? So what would happen then is that would change the karma, because her mind is now freaking out. And when they cut her open, most likely her mind will now leave the body. And that could cause her to get a suffering rebirth, a lower realm rebirth. So as Lama Zopa says in the book, you've got to be very careful. You've got to be very conscious. And this is difficult because no one in the world talks about future lives. So in many cases, you won't know that's going on. I mean, I had operations recently. I wasn't conscious. So it can equally be many people who are dead. The gross consciousness is dead, but the subtle mind is still there, but they won't be aware of what's going on. So they'll die a very happy death and they'll give their organs. But it's a tricky thing. You've got to be really thinking about it. And I think even now, I mean, he was very critical, this man, about the industry. They're so manipulative, so elitist, forcing people to give their organs, you know. Like in Europe, in many countries now, the default law is that you will give your organs unless you decide otherwise. So he was quite heavy about it. And he's in this industry, in the medical industry. So, but nevertheless, it's still a marvelous thing to do. You can't deny it. But as long as you die peacefully and it doesn't distress your mind and you're not aware of it while it's happening and it doesn't cause you to have negative karma created, which gives you a lower realm rebirth, then great. But who can navigate all that? Who can be certain, you know? So it needs thinking about, in other words. I mean, I said a lot of things there. I hope it was something useful. If you have questions, please ask me. So I know I do talk fast. Did it make sense what I said? Was it clear? Especially for the person who asked. Good. What else, people? Any other questions?
Yes. Another question. What if calling the doctor soon after death in a non-Buddhist country is the best way to prevent the deceased from having to undergo autopsy? Does this help?
Nothing wrong with autopsy as long as the mind is gone. Nothing wrong with autopsy as long as the mind is gone. But if the mind is still there, that's the same as that woman having an operation. It could freak the mind out. So, you know, the Buddhist approach is you don't call the doctors until for 3 days. And I think in many, but again, we tend to call the doctors because we freak out, we panic. If you're in the hospital, for example, let's say you're in the hospital with your grandma and it's 3 a.m, the first thing they do is panic and rush and call the nurses. No, don't call the nurses. Stay as long as you can. And if you're going to work with the doctors and nurses beforehand, you ask them, if my grandma dies, do not touch her. Call me immediately. And you have as long as you can peacefully with saying prayers. This is the whole approach. So you've got to have your wits about you. You know, a friend of mine in a nursing home in Australia, her husband was dying. And when he died, because she was paying the rent, she shooed the nurses and doctors out, locked the door, and spent 3 days doing prayers and practices. If you can do that, that's the best scenario. But have as long as you can. So don't call the doctor. And I mean, it's not against the law, but people just panic. They don't look into it first. Often it's not against the law. So you've got to know what the laws are and be wise and be practical and be sensible. A friend of mine, a husband and wife and daughter were all Buddhist. And Paul, the man, this is 30 years ago in Santa Cruz, he had a very bad heart, and he got his wife to promise that if he had a heart attack again, would kill him next time. He said, do not call the ambulance. But she panicked and called the ambulance. So they took him to the Santa Cruz hospital. Then me and the daughter went there at 4 a.m, and we did all the prayers he wanted. He wanted these prayers done, and he did not want to be wired up. You could tell he was worried. So we did the prayers, they pulled the plug, he stopped breathing, and then they were very kind, and they very gently put him in the bag and then took him to the mortuary. And there they were very kind. We sat all day with him doing prayers and practices. We wanted to stay all night, to stay with his body. They wouldn't let us. So we gave them a CD of the Gyuto monks chanting, and they promised they'd put that on in the fridge to play all night. That's the kind of thing, because it'll help the subtle mind if the subtle mind is still there. So then we came back the next day and did more prayers and more practices, and then he got cremated. So that's the ideal scenario, to spend 1 or 2, 3 days doing prayers and practices if you can. In a hospital, it's quite difficult. Lama Yeshe passed away in hospital in Cedars Sinai in Los Angeles in 1983. So the doctors were so kind, Lama Zopa said. They allowed, after Lama's heart stopped, and they tried to keep him alive, but nothing happened. They put the defibrillator on, it didn't come back to life. So then they wheeled him very gently to another spare room, and they allowed him to stay there for the whole day. And Lama Zopa and many of the students sat there all day doing practices, So there's different things you can do, but you've got to have your wits about you. This is why Lama Zopa's book is so helpful. As he says, it's the education we all need, so know how to help, because it takes up to 3 days for the mind to leave. That's the point. The mind, sometimes, when it's a very violent death, it will be very quick. The mind will leave immediately, in which case there's no point in spending 3 days, And there's ways of checking whether the mind has left. This is all in Lama Zopa's book, How to Face Death Without Fear. What else?
Great. Another question. This is from Gus. Quote, happiness is the result of virtue, unquote. And happiness, quote, happiness is the fundamental nature of the mind, unquote. How do we understand both of these at the same time?
Because the mind, when it's totally blissful, is the result of constant virtue, and there's no non-virtue left. So there's only virtue left. So you'll have continuous bliss for eternity. It's the fruit of virtue. There it is, right there. That's the proof. What's wrong with that, Chris? Gus, does that sound reasonable? This is conventional nature, Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, I think so. I think I understand it. So even through, because that makes sense, because even when you're enlightened, the bliss that you're feeling is the result of the virtue.
Absolutely. And that's where it's almost like on a conventional level, you could argue that the constant actions of a Buddha, infinite virtue, infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, are kind of putting petrol in the tank for the next 50 trillion eons. It can never end. That's a conventional way of putting it.
I understand.
You understand what I'm saying? It's just a simple way of putting it, I would say. It is the nature of the mind. Ultimately, emptiness is is the nature of the mind, but the conventional nature is its clarity. It's, and it has to be the fruit of virtue. That's the cause of it. It has to be a cause of something. There has to be a cause of Buddhahood. There has to be a cause of joy. There has to be a cause. And so at the moment, we just get moments of bliss, which is some virtue. But then when you've cut the delusions, you can only have bliss, which is the fruit of virtue. It can be nothing else. And wisdom, isn't it? Makes sense, don't you think?
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Gus. What else, people?
Okay, what about viruses? Is it wrong to kill them, or are they not sentient?
It's really hard to know, isn't it? I think sentient beings can be so tiny. The ones even in the animal realm, they're all in the animal realm. It's impossible to know what is a mind possessor. It's impossible to know. So we don't know. We don't know if virus is a sentient being. We don't know that all these things are sentient beings. It's impossible to know. But we can guarantee there are sentient beings in our body. whether they're viruses or not. I mean, just under our armpit apparently is like a zoo. Our mouth is an entire ecosystem. Think about it. So a virus might not be a sentient being, but there are guaranteed to be lots of others there. So you can't avoid, even eating the best carrots in the planet might upset the sentient beings in our body. You can't win, you know. In fact, the Buddhists would say the entire physical world is pervaded by sentient beings. There's not an atom of space you won't find sentient beings. You could argue wherever there are the four elements, that is a conducive environment for the existence of sentient beings to live there. So you can't win. Okay. What else?
Great. How does your mind stream stay together after death so it can find its way to a new body?
That's a good question, I know. It's such a good question. It's all due to the imprints in the mind, the programming in the mind. So our minds are basically seeds and fruits is the analogy the Buddha uses. He didn't know about programming, but programming is a great analogy, you know. You just program it and then the robot behaves. You program and the robot will do exactly what you program. Well, that's karma. It's programming. Honestly, it's the best way to put it. Our mind is continually doing things and thinking things and saying things because it's been programmed like that. We think we're so intelligent, like we're making choices. Half the time we're not making choices. We're just acting out our programming. So then at the time of death, of all the billions of karmic seeds in our bank vaults, in our case, the particular karmic seed was triggered, that was a virtuous one of non-killing that programmed our mind already exactly to go to my mummy and my daddy's egg and sperm several weeks later when they hopped into bed. That's programmed. It's already programmed. That compels it, driven by attachment. Attachment is the motor that runs me at the time you leave the intermediate state. So when you do, okay, then the second one is your mind is then programmed with these tendencies. I mean, look at it. Look, we wake up in this life. We've got habits. Look at the children who can play piano. I'm captivated by those little children on YouTube. There's one little Russian boy. He looks like a little blonde angel, you know? And he's this genius pianist. I mean, like you just can't believe, you know? What are people who write music called? What are they? I forget words. What is it? What a person who writes music. What's the word?
Composer.
A really serious composer friend of mine, I played him, this little boy who's at 6, he said he could not believe, he said it sounded like a mature musician. Now, where do you think that comes from, folks? He must have played piano. He must have programmed his mind in piano. No one had to teach him. He just out comes the music. It's programming. This is karma. We are propelled by the force of our past karma. You put seeds in the ground, you give them nourishment, they will do their job. They will grow. That's karma. So karma is what runs the universe, not God up there running, you know, trying to control. There's no conspiracy theory of people running things. Actions take care. Karma is programming us. If we didn't do any more karma now, we'd have countless future lives all programmed in us, already just act. It's like long term. Put the petrol in the car, it'll just run. It's like that, if that makes sense. What else?
Okay, next question. Why, if you have lived a kind life, creating positive karma, doing purification for negative karma, why is what happens at the time of death more important for your rebirth than your life?
Who said it is? Who said that? I didn't say that. But I understand the point, but that's often how we hear it. But there are trillions of karmic seeds in our bank vault. Trillions from trillions of lives. There are trillions of tendencies, trillions of all these different things. So then clearly, if you do lead a good life, in other words, using if you do lead a good life, if you practice every day, if you do purify, then you will guarantee you will have a good death. You can guarantee you will get a good rebirth. Karma takes care. So if you, in your example, it's not as if it's more important, but what happens at death is the time in which these karmic seeds that you have planted will be triggered. So the stronger the karmic seeds, the more peaceful your death, the more karma takes care. You'll have a really nice rebirth and a really nice death. You have to worry about it. What's next?
Do you have more about that, Ariane, that you needed to clarify?
No, I guess I must have misunderstood. I thought, like, if you had all of a sudden something traumatic at your time of death, that that was the karmic seed that would then ripen.
But the point is, darling, if it's sort of like this, if you've only done a little bit of driving, you're not very good at driving, but you've done some driving, and then at the driving test, how do you think you will act? How would you'd be having a panic attack, wouldn't you? You wouldn't be successful. But if you've driven so well, when it gets to the driving test, you're guaranteed everything will work perfectly. It's what the more you practice, the more you're capable of doing something. That's the point. It's logic.
Okay.
It's logic.
That makes sense. Thank you.
But let's say you've never practiced. You've been a fairly nice person, but you've never been aware. You've never practiced. You've never purified. And then you die a really miserable death and your children all hate you. It's not fair. It sounds like not fair, but you're freaking out. Then one of the negative karmic seeds will be triggered because you're not prepared. You didn't prepare for it. So the crucial way to prepare is live a good life. Live in the context of impermanence. Practice every day. Purify every day. Then death will be a blissful experience.
Okay. Thank you. I understand. That makes it more clear.
Very glad you asked that question. Go on. Karma, Lamayeshi says, karma takes care. In other words, look at this, it's so logical. We love laws in our culture. We have complete acceptance of the laws of engineering, architecture, numbers. We are confident when you have the right plan and the right things, you can put up a building of 100 floors and it will stay up. Because you know all the laws, so easy, gardens. You listen to me even, Ariane. Let's say you're a botanist and I know nothing about such a law even existing. And you've got an acre of land and you have exactly a plan, you've planted all the seeds and you can tell me exactly how it will look in 10 years. That's possible, isn't it? Would you agree with that? And I don't know about botany. And I'll go, wow. And you'll proceed to describe to me exactly how your garden will look in 10 years. And I'll be amazed. I'll say, oh, Ariane, you're clairvoyant. And you'll say, no, Robina, I just know the law of botany. Karma's like that.
Got it. That's great. I got.
It's not hit and miss. It's not punishment. It's not reward. It's not fair. It's not unfair. It's logic.
Thank you.
Good. What else, people?
Lisa, would you like to unmute to ask your question?
Yep. Jennifer, my question is about, it's a clarification of the terminology that you're talking about euthanasia. So is that what you broadly mean in regards to anything? Because there's also, I've been a hospice director, withdrawal of care, and then choosing not to have aggressive treatment, which is the hospice movement. When you talk about euthanasia, which, technically talk about the legal part, is only legal, I think, in Oregon, or is that just what you're using to group the whole thing?
So what I mean, okay, it's a very good question, Lisa. Thank you so much, darling. You see, what's so interesting now in our culture, our medical profession, we have these amazing methods now to keep people alive longer than they normally would if we allowed them to live a natural life. We know that. We have all these interventions. And it's so interesting because over the centuries in our, or even a little bit, the main energy, it seems to be behind the medical profession is to keep people alive and keep them healthy and as well as possible, which is really marvelous. But it seems to me, I would suggest we've created these dilemmas for ourselves, haven't we? We've got such brilliant techniques now, such good interventions that we can keep a person alive for 100 years. Can't we do that? It's true, isn't it? So it's sort of created a dilemma for us. So we've now got this scenario, whereas you've got to now make a decision, should we pull the plug? So this happened to my friend Paul. He didn't want to be kept alive. That's why we have to have all these new things now. And people got to say, I don't want to be kept alive. So that's not thinking I'm going to kill myself. It's saying, I'd like to die naturally, please. Give me a break, back off, which is not the same. So Paul, we had to pull the plug. That's not called killing Paul. Whereas the idea of, another point is this too. Another point is this. When we look at all the actions we do, we talked about the motivation being the key point. Remember I said before, the motivation for why you do it. Now, we can see the motivation behind euthanasia. No, not suicide is one thing. So suicide, I know it's again another Greek word, and it means when you kill yourself. It's called euthanasia for yourself. But forget that for a minute. The reason we do it to grandma or the mouse is because we want them not to suffer. That the motivation is great, but just as to whether it will bring a good result, that's the Buddhist view. You've got to factor in the mind continuing. That's another discussion. But now when it comes to yourself, I think it's a really interesting point. If we look in general, when we think about somebody committed suicide, we feel sad Because we know that usually, I mean, in general, usually a person is full of despair, hopelessness, the suffering is unbearable, and it's like a desperate end. In general, without criticizing anybody, my sense is, if we analyze it carefully, that the motivation behind killing yourself is because you can't stand the mental or the physical pain. You can't stand life. You can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. So it's kind of sad. Wouldn't you agree with that, Lisa, in general? In general. Okay. So then if we analyze actions we do, and if the motivation for doing them is the thing that determines whether it's a negative seed or a positive seed that is triggered before you die, then we have to deduce that if you're dying out of despair, your mind is not happy at the time of death. So that can only usually, logically, trigger a negative seed and cause you to get a really suffering rebirth. So it's a technical issue. And the Buddhist approach will be, it's not going to bring you any happiness. It won't bring you that positive result you want. But we do it out of such despair because we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, whereas you could argue, possibly, the world does these days more and more, that we have the right to kill ourselves. That's a big, strong thing in the world at the moment, isn't it? Isn't it? Do you agree? So then it seems to us, this is my own commentary on it, it seems quite rational and it seems appropriate. And in a sense, Buddhism would say, yeah, we are in charge. We are in charge of our own life. We are allowed to make our own decisions. But as His Holiness said one time, even about abortion, of course you have the right to decide about your own body. Of course you have the right to decide to kill yourself or not. But again, the simple point is this. We have to look at what motivates it. We have to look, is it peaceful? Is it virtuous? Is it a happy state of mind? Or is it, I'm allowed to kill myself. I'm going to organize it. But the point is, because we're not aware, I think, of this mind at a subtle level, we don't know about the death process the way Buddhism describes. So you can't guarantee that even if you rationally decided you're going to die at a certain point, there's no certainty, unless you've worked on your mind throughout your life, that your mind will be peaceful and virtuous, which will be then what will be triggering a virtuous karmic seed, which is what will program you to get a new future rebirth. But most people who kill themselves don't have the view of karma. So it's a very tricky point, It's a technical point, really. All this discussion is based around the concept that your mind continues, If the mind, my feeling is, Lisa, if your mind doesn't continue, then I don't think there's anything problem with killing yourself. I mean, why not kill myself now? If my mind doesn't continue, what does it matter? Think about that for a second, please. Really think about that. It does not matter. But why do we have so much fear about it? Why do we have much resistance to this idea, If my mind does not continue, I cannot see anything wrong with killing myself. Do you see what I'm saying? Because there's no consequence. There's no consequence. Karma is a continuity of consciousness. And you don't want the mind to get a suffering rebirth. So then you have to die in a nice way. It's practical. It's a practical issue in a way. Are you with me, Lisa? Just discussion.
Yeah. And from what you just mentioned as well about, having a calm, peaceful death, in my job in hospice, I've seen multiple times where a person's having a very calm and peaceful death, and then some long lost relative walks in the door and of course freaks out and calls the ambulance, and then they end up intubated in the hospital and then of course have a horrible death. Terrible. Now, is there karma for the person that's coming in? Well, I guess not, because they're just motivated and they're freaking out themselves about their family member. But yeah, I've seen that happen so many times. What's the karmic result from that?
That's so what so you mean, why would a family member come in and take them away from that scenario?
Oh, it happens a lot, so many times. Yeah, so what happens, a person's on hospice, they might have metastatic cancer, they've been alert and orientated, they've signed consents, they've been on services, and then of course the time of death is happening. So they're actively dying. Then they might lose consciousness. Then it could be the wife, it could be a close family member. I've even seen long lost family members come in, whether it was to the home or to the hospice facility.
And what will they say?
To the family members, oh no, you can't do this. I've read somewhere or Googled that such and such can happen. They're not really dying, like their own, in the US and most Western countries.
So but in the end, surely, so the crucial point is, if we're going to be the person in that bed, we'd better have it all written out that we've got the right to do what we damn well want and not have people stick their noses in. That's the problem, isn't it? That's terrible.
So is there negative, and that does happen, as I said.
Of course it is, darling. Of course it's negative karma of the person. Of course it is.
For the person that does that.
Of course it is, sweetheart. Of course it is. Yes, of course it is. But it's so important. That's why it's so important to have what they call a living will, isn't it? People, you write down exactly what you want to happen. So my old ex-cousin can't come in and put me somewhere else. You've got to decide these yourself. It's so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, darling. What else, people?
Venerable, someone wanted to know what the name and author of the book on dying for humans and animals is, please.
It's called How to Face Death Without Fear, and it's by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and it's published by Wisdom Publications, and it's both, I think it's available as an ebook as well as the paperback.
Great.
It's a really helpful How to Face Death Without Fear, and it's Wisdom Publications, and the author is Lama Zopa Rinpoche.
I'll post the link for it as well.
Good, thank you, darling. It's wonderful.
Okay, another question. What about COVID? Some people can't even say goodbye, and since there are too many corpses at the same time, sometimes they're not properly taken care of. What can be done for them?
Nothing. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? It's just, this is the most heartbreaking thing that I've heard about, when you can't have anybody there to help you die peacefully. Lama Zopa says in this book that if you want to help anybody in their lifetime, when they need you most is at that literal period when the death process starts, which is usually a couple of hours before you stop breathing. That's when you need a person to help you navigate this, to help you be steady, kind of metaphorically to hold your hand through this process so you don't panic and don't have fear, because fear is the most common result, the most common. I mean, Lisa, that's interesting. Are you there, Lisa? You still there? She's gone. So then have you noticed that fear is very common among people who are dying? Especially if they've got no practice and no awareness of it and living in fear, or not? What do you find as you're working?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people become so afraid and agitated that they've gotten up and walked after being bedbound for years. Other people pass very peacefully, and it's beautiful.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, the way they talk them is, again, like I'm saying before, in Lama Zopa's book, he explains that this death process, as it's described in terms of 9 stages of this gradual deconstruction of the body and the mind of the person. It's all very detailed. It's in the Vajrayana. So at a certain point, before you even stop breathing, this very powerful grasping kicks in, which is what triggers then the karmic seed that will determine your next life. And it's in that period then you need a person to be there for you, to help you. Because we all know, we all know in our own lives, if you've got a lot of fear, the first thing we do is we desperately try to reach out to somebody, don't we, to keep us comfortable. We all reach out to somebody when we're very fearful. So that to have a person who's there can just help you steady. And, if you've got a loving, kind person next to you in the bedroom, and you just look at them, they're smiling at you and loving you and taking care of you, you immediately can calm down. And that's the most crucial thing, because when the mind is steady and calm, that will trigger a virtuous karmic seed. It's just a natural relationship between the mind when it's calm and virtuous karmic seeds. If the mind is agitated, that's the fear kicking in. And that's how most people die. That's why, and that's also the point. In our culture, of course, we drug the person out of their brains. And we often say, oh, look, she's so peaceful. But drugs can medicate physical pain. It can't medicate mental anguish, because then you just go to your subtle mind and you're in a coma or you're in a dream and you're having freaked out time. So the mind has to be peaceful. That's the job we need to do, not the body. That's the nurses and doctors' job. Our job is to help the person be peaceful. Then that allows a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered. And then, as Lama Zopa says, that death is a very blissful experience. A friend of mine, so many stories, but a friend of mine, an Australian who lived at Vajrapani Institute in California, and he fell off the roof. He was doing something at the Dharma Center. He fell off the roof and he's in his wife's arms, dying. And she said he was so blissful, so radiant, because your mind is getting more subtle, and because a virtuous karmic seed has been triggered, and you're moving towards your perfect human rebirth or a pure land rebirth. So it's almost like you're seeing it come. Even I tell you this, I love this story, how Steve Jobs died. I love this story. He knew he was dying for several years. He had some kind of cancer. And I heard even in one of the memoirs of his daughter from his previous marriage, she talked about how this particular Lama is a Brazilian, actually. He was recognized by Lati Rinpoche as a Rinpoche. He's a healer. I can't think of his Segi Rinpoche or something. He's a friend of mine. I can't remember his name, though. He's in California. And apparently he would be with Steve doing healings. So clearly he had a connection with Buddhism. I don't know how big it was, but nevertheless, when he died, his sister, they'd been given away at birth, and so they met later in life, and she was a writer, and she wrote about this she gave a memorial and talked about the day he died. And she said there he was on the bed, really skinny, he had some kind of liver disease, cancer or something, as skinny as a rake. And anyway, she said there's a particular scenario when he died. Try and imagine, I'm the sister here, and in front of me is Steve, and then Steve, I can see Steve's face, and in front of Steve is his 2 daughters, and all I can do is see the back of their head, but I can see Steve's face, and I'm the sister. And she said his face, he was looking so blissfully at the 2 daughters, his own 2 daughters, begging them to forgive him for leaving them. In other words, he wasn't grasping and frantic and freaking out. He was full of love and compassion. And then the sister said, me, looking at him, he looked over their shoulder into the distance and he went, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. And then he died. So all I can deduce is he died very quickly. It went through this. This can take several hours normally, but suddenly his mind started to get more subtle, and then he literally was like having a vision of the future. They say it's like going towards the light. That's what they say in the texts. So he had some kind of pure land rebirth. So he was blissful, and then he died. That's a really good way to die, you know. Equally, there's a nun I know. Lama Zopa talks about this. Very common in general, that people freak out, agitated beyond belief, and even start as they're dying, they're having visions of their future suffering rebirth. It's like seeing monsters. They're completely freaking out, hallucinating, going crazy. That's a tormented way to die, and that's an indication that a negative seed is triggered, and they're going to get a very suffering rebirth. So to be there for a person, the mouse or the dog or the human, to help them be peaceful, to help them be virtuous, this is the most precious gift you can give. That's the essence of the whole thing, really. The whole book was about 400 pages, you know, and how to do that, and the practices to do to help them. That's the thing. What else, people?
This goes beautifully into the next question from Susan. Dear Robina, please could you give a practice or visualization to do before sleep, or to replicate the death process as a way to prepare?
Yeah, that's in this book. There's exactly a meditation that you can either lead your loved one through, or you can do it yourself. It's in the book, exactly. The meditation of replicating these 8 stages. Gradually, the earth element ceases, then the this, then the hearing goes, then that. It's each step of the way. And it's a great meditation to do to prepare you. In fact, it's one of the major meditations, especially in the Vajrayana, where you combine this with your sadhana. And you know, when you do the dissolution of the deity into your, and you go through this death process, it's the perfect way to be prepared for death. So then you start to even, and then at the time of death, you might even recognize it. And the greatest meditators, the greatest yogis, know exactly how to do this, and they can go through this process completely in control. They can get to the very subtle level of mind, and they can stay conscious there for days by meditating, and they can even get enlightened then. So it's a marvelous meditation to do. It's in the book. What else?
If one is reading Medicine Buddha to the dying person, does the person reap benefits even if they can't hear your voice?
Yes, and that's this is what's interesting now, and that's an example. You know, the person having an out-of-body experience while they're under anesthetic, they can hear it and see it. The subtle mind has the ability to see and hear. You don't need to have ears and eyes. The subtle mind has this power. So the same with the lady who was supposedly dead, and they're going to cut her open. I mean, many people have that experience. I had one time when I first became a nun. I did my 3-month Vajrasattva retreat in Dharamsala at Tushita, and it was a rainy season, very torrential rain in the rainy season up there. So we'd have our nap at lunchtime, always have our nap after lunch. And I remember vividly, I mean, 3 months meditating is quite intense. Now, I'm not much of a meditator, but something has to happen after 3 months. So then your mind gets very clear sometimes. So I had these, for a period, during this lunch period, I had these crystal clear dreams, like people call them lucid dreaming, crystal clear. But as if I were awake, but at the same time, because my mind was so clear, I could hear whatever was going on around me. Now, I was unconscious, my ears were not working, but that's the capacity of the subtle mind, and that's the beginning of the capacity of clairvoyance, which we can eventually develop. So this is interesting. This is where definitely you can benefit others if you take this view. Animals that are unconscious, grandma who's in a coma. And a wonderful example for me was one of my friends in Sydney, years and years and years ago, Judy. She was in the ER and she was dying. As far as they're concerned, she was in the deepest coma and she wasn't going to come out of the coma. So she was very close to some of the lamas. They used to come and stay in her house and things. So when I heard she was in the ER, I asked her husband if I could go there. And so I went there at night. It was like 40, 50 miles from where the center was. So I had to drive at night. It was easier, you know. And so then I would go there and just say prayers in her ear. She was all plugged in with all these things, completely unconscious. And I'd say prayers in her ears. And occasionally I'd asked her, 2 of these lamas that she really liked, was very close to, I asked their students to ask the lamas to pray for Judy. So every now and again, I'd say to Judy in her ear, whisper, Judy, Tsongtsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Or I'd say, Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you. Anyway, eventually she came out of this coma. all perky and bright, totally fine. And I went to visit her, and she told me that the only thing she remembered from those weeks of being in a coma, the only thing was this husky voice. She didn't know it was me, she said. She thought it was a blue lady coming through the window, this husky voice saying, Judy, Samsara Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you. Now, that's the power of the holy beings. I mean, there are so many stories like this. Jeffrey Hopkins, that American scholar, he told me that I interviewed him in Mandalay in 95 when we first started. And when I first started the magazine, when I first started editing Mandalay, it had been going since 87. So he told me about when he got Lyme's disease. He went into a complete coma. They did not think he had come out alive. He said the only thing he could find in his mind was this particular mantra that Ling Rinpoche had given him and said, never forget this mantra. And he came back again, he came back. He said the only thing he could find in his mind, the only thing that Judy. So this is the point, because the subtle mind is more powerful and because the holy beings, the Buddhas and mantra are so potent, this is the best way to help your dying ones. If your grandma's dying, don't just leave her there in her own misery. Play mantras quietly day and night. She'll be able to see the Buddha. The Buddha will come to her. The sound of the prayers is incredible because the subtle mind is capable. It's the best way you can help the mouse, the ant, the dog, the human. Easiest. Got to think this through. If you have confidence in this system, so powerful. What else? Interesting questions.
There's no direct questions from this conversation that are popping up right now, but there's some from about an hour ago.
Go on and say, what is it?
So one from Barbara, can we trust our own judgment regarding practice during this time of seclusion?
Well, that's like asking me, can I trust my own wisdom to know what piano to play in this time of seclusion? It all depends on how much teaching you've got under your belt. It all depends on how much you've done in the past. It all depends on what you've done. So that's the answer to dependent arising, isn't it? You do your best though, but surely you can consult people. You can go to teachings during this time of seclusion, isn't it? But if you've got a practice under your belt and you know that practice, but if you haven't got much practice, then you don't know what to do. So it's good to consult. And that's why it's so marvelous we can have these Zoom teachings now, isn't it? It's been a lifesaver for people. Isn't it? What else, darling? What else is there?
Great. From Jonathan, Venerable, it seems to me that attachment can have a physiological component. So the addict experiences a physiological discomfort that they believe will only be relieved from the sex or the drugs or whatever. What recommendations do you have for dealing with that physiological discomfort? Sometimes the addiction can seem as basic as needing to feed oneself food.
Of course.
I need to
it's
drink.
Unbelievable suffering.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because this is why if we look at the, especially the Vajrayana model of the body and the mind, this is explaining to us what that is. Let's just look at the not the materialist view. That's one view. This is the Buddhist view. Look at the Vajrayana model. So what the story is this? It's like this. We've got gross body and gross mind. This is what we see now. This bag of bones linked to the gross sensory consciousness and indeed access to our mental consciousness. But then we've got subtle consciousness. And that's when we dream, or that's the coma mind. That's as you go through the death process. So the subtle mind and the subtle body are inextricably linked. And the subtle body is consisting, this is the Tibetan medical system. This is in Vajrayana. The 72,000 subtle channels going through our entire body. Throughout all those channels are coursing all these wind energies or prana. This is the basis of Tibetan medical system. You study this stuff for 12, 14 years. It's similar to the Ayurvedic. It's similar to the Chinese acupuncture one. This is still the model they use, It's clearly not the allopathic system that we're describing here. So all these wind energies are intimate, so all these different kind of wind energies, and this is the point now, they're inextricably linked. All these winds are inextricably linked to all our thousands of states of mind. So mind and wind, these subtle physical energies are inextricably linked. So all the different mind energy, all the different states of mind are coursing through these channels linked to these winds. So that's physical. So then attachment is the mind. Attachment is this hunger, this emotional hunger, and we're addicted to something, the food, the body, the alcohol, whatever the object is. And of course, some attachments are really powerful. The ones that, as you just said, have a physiological. Thinking about, attached to money is hard, it's pretty intense to have a physiological, we don't necessarily. The mind goes berserk, thinking of it, wanting it. But the ones that we're physical contact, like food, like bodies, even music can have a physiological, because it's intense sensory experiences, aren't they? So that's the mind. Attachment is the mind, but the winds the mind is attached to become very disturbed. So you go to your Tibetan doctor, she'll feel your pulses. And even if you're just having mild anxiety, she will know it's those particular winds that are linked to your attachment, which is what causes anxiety. So God knows what the wind energy will be doing if she feels your pulses when you're having this craving attack for the alcohol. Of course, it's physiological, but that's not attachment. Attachment is the mind, and the physiological is the part of your body, your wind energies that the attachment is connected to, and that impacts upon the gross body. So the mind and the body are intimately linked, but they're not the same thing. That's the way to put it. I hope that helps. So how to deal with it? This is what's so painful. Of course it's so painful. Of course it's painful. Unbelievable pain of craving, you know, unbelievable. Giving up cigarettes, giving up drugs, unbelievable pain. And this is where we have to have a lot of courage, because if we have this analysis even of the body and the mind and how they're separate, and you do everything you can to try and protect yourself, you know, to at least to persevere through it, because you know eventually it will end. Everybody who's given up alcohol or drugs can tell you the same thing. But you've got to have the courage to persevere through that time, have as much support as you can, have good friends to help you. You know, it's not easy. You got to see the benefit of doing it. It's not easy, but you need a lot of support. But yes, of course the body's involved, but attachment isn't the body. They're different things. What next? This entire 2 hours has been questions. How interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of it.
No, it's good. It's important.
Stephanie had asked if karma is a function of purification. Is there a relation between the two? And we know that you mentioned that you were going to go over purification. So
I will. So maybe the time is now. We can just go through the process. Why not? There's two things now. I've got 20 minutes left. So the two things we'll do is talk about the power of vows and talk about the power of purification, because these are the extra tools we can have that give a rocket boost to the process of creating karma. So creating karma means you do actions with your mind, then you impact, then the body and speech. So you can either do negative actions, but then you can do the practice of purifying the negative actions, or you can do positive actions, and then you can enhance them. So the vows and purification are like rocket boosts, you know? So then, okay, let's first look at the power of vows. Maybe we won't get past that, but maybe we can do purification tomorrow. We've got tomorrow, haven't we? Yes, Sunday, that's right. So, okay, let's look at vows first. This is very powerful. Buddha loves his vows. Vows are vital. As far as the Tibetan Buddhist view is concerned, you cannot get far without living in vows. And there's a logical reason to this, taking the view of what vows are. Let's look at it, okay? So look, okay, right here, right at the second, we can see most of us are not actively killing. So that means we're doing the action of not killing, but we're actually not doing an action of not killing. We're merely passively not killing. But and this is the point now, this is the whole point about karma, your mind has to be involved. Pretty much generally your mind has to be doing something, because karma is first created by the mind. And then the body and speech then act out the mind's wishes. So if we're sitting here right now, literally not killing, then your mind is not saying, I will not kill. Therefore, you could argue there is zero karma of non-killing. So it seems a bit passive, but it's really amazing the difference. But if you have a thought, I will not kill. So what is the time you'd have that thought? When I see the ant on my kitchen sink, when I go over there, I'll see an ant. And that moment, the thought will come, I must not kill the ant. Then is when you create the karma of not killing. But because the motivation is not that strong, like I said before, our compassion is not that powerful, then the action of killing, non-killing that I do, that where I pop a seed into my bank vault, it's not a very strong seed because my motivation is not very strong. So then the only time you will then create the karma of not killing is when you actively think, I will not kill. But that's not enough. It's just not enough. So what are you going to do? Well, live in vows. So what is a vow? Vows for the Buddha are so potent that they are said to be a subtle physical form. that is visible to clairvoyance. There's something so potent about that. So what a vow is a decision you make, a conscious decision you make when you take refuge, or soon after that, you will be kneeling in front of the person who for you is the Buddha, and you will repeat after that person 3 times, from this moment until the time of my death, I will not kill, I will not steal, I will not lie. And then every day you purify that, and we'll go into that. You will say, I will never kill, I will never kill. Next day, I will never kill. You programming your mind in not killing. And the power of vows is such that Lama Zopa said that the 24 hours a day that you've got that vow, you're keeping it purely 24 hours a day, even without intention, without motivation, you are ticking over virtuous karmic seeds, and you're purifying your mind, and you're creating masses of virtue. So it's like you literally cannot get ahead of the game without vows. Literally, because our virtue is just not strong enough. So 24 hours a day that you're keeping that vow, even while you're in the pub having a beer with your best new boyfriend, while you're snoring asleep, that vows are ticking over virtuous karmic seeds and putting atomic bombs under the habit to kill. So you can't live without vows. That's the only reason I'm a nun wearing these 14th century robes and a bald head, I promise you. Only reason, because I love the concept of vows. It's super powerful psychology. The power of vows. The Buddhist teachings are we can't get ahead of the game psychologically because of this. Because it's only when you think I will not kill that you put the seed of not killing, because mind has to be involved. My hand doesn't create karma. It helps the mind create karma. Is that clear, people? So you've got 3 sets of vows. The first level of teachings is the junior school and high school, the wisdom wing. Lowest and middle scope. That's the vows of individual liberation, as they call it, pati moksha, individual liberation. That's the first level of practice, and you are the beneficiary of this. So the vows there are at least not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, not to jump on the wrong partner, and not to take intoxicants. When you take refuge and take the vows, you can take any or all of those, you know. So when you break in a major way, you kill a human being, for example. If you kill a human with an intention, decision to do it, don't care that you've done it and no wish to purify it, then you break in a major way and you've got to take all the vows again. You break killing in a minor way if you kill any other being with the intention, not caring, and no conscience about it. So then each of those vows are like that. So there's so powerful level of practice just by living in vows. And then, of course, because you've got these vows, you want to purify them, you want to clean them up every night. So then this is where the purification comes in. Got time to at least mention in passing. We'll discuss in more detail tomorrow, all of this. So purification, Lama Zopa says we are insane not to do every day. So what's purification? Well, given that whatever our mind does and our body and our speech carrying out the wishes of the mind sows a seed in the mind, the negative actions, they're in the mind. So you've got to pull them out, don't you? You've got to purify them, put atomic bonds under them. One is to live in vows, so stupendous. The other is to do purification at the end of the day. Finish your day with this. So what do? The 4 opponent powers. It's so simple psychologically. It's such practical psychology. 1, the 4 R's. You regret, acknowledge, I did kill, I did kick the dog, I did badmouth my boyfriend, I did cheat, I did this, I did that, I did lie. Whatever, you be honest. I did let the ant go down the sink. I was kind of lazy, you know. You be very sincere with yourself. You're very accountable. And this is for kindness to yourself, I promise. You acknowledge you did. And why do you regret it? Not because you're guilty. The worst one is we think I'm therefore a bad person. I always quote this. His Holiness was asked one time, what's the difference between this healthy, self-respectful regret attitude and what's the difference between that and guilt? He said, with guilt, which we love to have, you look in the past and you go, I kicked the dog, I did this, I badmouthed my boyfriend, I had the abortion, and then you go, I'm a bad person. So guilt is anger, but you're the object. And it's totally useless. There's no solution. There's no action. It's just you sit in misery and get worse. It is awful. It is cruelty to ourselves. There's nothing useful about it. But ego grasping causes us to do that, you know. So we've got to be very clear about it. So he says regret, first part's the same. I did kick the dog. I did have an abortion. I did harm my boyfriend. But then you say, and you must say it, what can I do to fix it? What can I do to change? That's proaction. That's powerful. That's the complete difference. So regret is compassion for yourself. They always use the analogy, it's like you've eaten poison. If you've just eaten poison in your dinner, You wouldn't go, oh my God, I ate poison. I'm such a bad person. And you sit there getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And you keep saying, I'm such a bad person. It is completely absurd. The first thing you would do is you'd be galvanized into action. Oh my God, I cannot believe I ate poison. Quick, what can I do about it? That's the logical consequence, because you know that poison will bring consequences of suffering to you. Well, that's the attitude of karma. Me killing and bad mouthing will bring consequences of suffering to me. I don't want suffering. What can I do about it? We've got to cultivate that view. We love to fall into the guilt, which is very concrete. And it's exactly the same as anger. You did this and you did this and you did this and you're a bad person. That's exactly what guilt is, except you're the object. And it's a nightmare. We run to it automatically. We've got to consciously change it. The second one is, well, whom can I turn to? Where's my doctor? Buddha's our doctor. You delight that you found a doctor and you visualize Buddha above your head. There's a whole way you do it. Maybe we'll discuss it tomorrow. Take refuge, whatever. Then the second part of reliance, this is called reliance, the second step. The second part here, you also cultivate compassion now for those you've harmed. The first one is compassion for yourself. Now it's compassion for others. You have compassion for those you've harmed. And if you're brave enough, you have compassion for those who've harmed you. Why? Because they'll suffer in the future. Then you do the remedy. And there's a whole medicine cabinet of remedies in Buddhism, but the key one here that all the lamas and all the traditions praise is this particular meditation. You're doing this in meditation, where the third step is you've got the Buddha above your head, and now you do this visualization and recitation of mantra. And the thing is, we just think, oh, that's just the mind, that's just fantasy. No, everything the mind does sows a seed in the mind. The more powerfully you have confidence that you're purifying, the more powerfully you want to purify, the more powerfully you say the mantra, the more you purify. It's your mind that purifies you. It's not Buddha who does it. You're using Buddha. He doesn't do the work. You do. And the fourth step is resolve, the decision to change. This is psychologically such a powerful practice. And to end the day with it is so appealing. In the center now here in Santa Fe, where I am, you know, they now have got morning, every morning at 7 o'clock, there's morning meditation, 30 minutes, and 30, 40 people come now. They love it, start the day. And we just got one a week, and I've started doing it. We did it last night, 30 minutes at 9 p.m. We do the 4 opponent powers, just 30 minutes. People love it. 25 people came to it, you know. We love to start the end, and simple little visualizations. People love it. It's 11 o'clock in New York. It's a bit late for you guys. So and then you go to bed with a happy mind, you know. So we'll talk more about these tomorrow. So first practice, immediate, start now. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Then you take refuge and you live in vows, which makes it more powerful, and then you purify at the end of the day. If you have this, you have a brilliant practice. And what are you doing? You're quitting the suffering of suffering. You'll guarantee when you die, you'll get another decent human rebirth, and you won't get lied to, and you won't lie, and people won't badmouth you, and all the things won't happen because you just purified them. You purified them and you've changed. This is so simple. The solution is there. Taking this view of karma, you know. You guarantee by this level of practice, junior school, that you quit the suffering of suffering. Now you go to high school and you get to attachment, and now you quit the suffering of change. And then you get to the final stages of the bodhisattva path and you realize emptiness, and now you quit the suffering, all pervasive suffering. Each level of practice is a solution to the 3 levels of suffering. It's all laid out there. It's up to us to like it and want to practice. Okay, you people, I'm running out of voice. Listen to me. 7 minutes to go. Maybe we can finish early. I didn't give you a break in between, so you can have an early break. Okay, you people.
Thank you so much.
I'll cheat you of 7 minutes. So, darling people, thank you so much. I hope
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable.
Chub sem chog rinpoche ma ke panam ke yu chi ke pa nyampa me pa yang gong ne bondu pa ba shog gewa din yu de dag lama sangye drugyo ne drowa chikyang malupa de yi sala go pa shog. And may you just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Rejoice in your amazing qualities. Be clear, see our mind, see our speech. Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, okay? Based on our amazing potential. Looking forward to that bliss. Not kidding. Okay,
Thank
darling.
you so much, Venerable. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.